Well, listen, let's, first of all, thanks for coming back to Austin.
Absolutely.
Making the time. Why don't
My
you
pleasure.
do me a favor, reintroduce yourself to all the nerds that don't remember who you are from the last time. Mr. Legend, go ahead, explain it.
Dan Crosby, founder and CEO of Legend Energy Advisors.
What does that company even do? So I'm only joking with you. We're going to
Ask myself that every day.
Hey, listen, these podcasts, as you know, are really focused on every aspect of the revolution that's taking place within the data center industry right now. And we've been watching it front row for a long time. You go high, wide, and deep on energy, and I try to do the same on data centers. And here we are now talking, because not that it's just left to us, but we have to use a platform to try to get a bridging gap closed between the disparity of knowledge that exists on the energy side and what the needs will really look like realistically from our side, right? Because everybody's like, well, I'm going to need, gigs of this and gigs of that. And we're at the same time, we're like, what do you really need, right? And when do you need that? And what we do know is the adoption rate of emerging technologies right now are they're outpacing our ability to put solutions for more energy online. Do you agree?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So right now we're staring down the barrel of an untenable and unscalable future with regards to data center infrastructure and critical infrastructure, specifically as it supports the demand for cloud and the demand for AI. Mm-hmm. And right now, you and I have been trying to figure out, how do we go make a difference in this space? I'm trying to solve it from labor, and you're trying to solve it from an energy and a power perspective. Why don't you give us, because this will be the first one, I know that we're recording this one now, but this one's going to be one of the first energy podcasts that we release in 2025. And I'm doing, as you know, a campaign where you and I are going to be doing this at least quarterly, hopefully every few months. We're sitting down or making the time to give a state of the union, so to speak. Because when you came to DCAC to speak, you gave a state of the power industry, and while the brokers gave a state of the data center industry.
Right.
And today we're talking about numbers that are being asked for with regards to energy that are just not possible today, right? We have 20 to 30 years of delay on transmission lines. Power generation is a huge factor for these engines that solve these things that we build are the sky for the cloud and the home for AI, and we are running out of labor to support the demand for those things, while simultaneously also running out of areas in the U.S. where there's energy to be able to support the demand of that technology. Mm-hmm. It's going to be left to us to try to unpackage what we're going to do to those things. And it's really left more to partners like you guys that are going to come in as the tip of the spear, that are going to help shine a light in these dark rooms within the industry where we're trying to figure out, where can I get energy? Where can I get power? And let's aggregate and consolidate some of these messages. I've read a ton of reports. You've read a ton of reports. But why don't you try to help break it down for sailors like me that could help try to explain it to other people in the space, so that we know how this impacts us. How does this impact every member that's on the enterprise side, every data center operator, the owners and operators for the co-location facilities, as well as the ecosystem, right? The ecosystem is all the contractors and the trades and the craftsmen and the equipment manufacturers that are bringing these things to life, right? So that's a lot to unpackage, but I wanted to kind of tee this up so you could just kind of vomit out some of that stuff that you know and unload your brain a little bit for us. Can you do that?
Yeah.
All right. Well, listen, let it bathe over us. Tell us, what does 2025 look like from an energy perspective? And should we be hopeful?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think to your point, this thing is just kind of logarithmically continued to increase in speed. Yeah. And I think about, so many industries that we've been involved with for 10 years now, that if I'd asked these same contacts who I knew 7 or 8 years ago what a data center was, they would have a hard time explaining it, or maybe even say, I don't know.
Sure.
And now it's kind of hard to bang into anybody in any industry that doesn't know what a data center is.
Right.
And so you've seen this
industry is emerging for sure.
Right. And so you've seen this proliferation that first kind of started proliferating with utilities and has caused, all sorts of chaos there. I think every landowner in the United States now thinks that their land is worth $1 billion.
It's quadrupled in value because now I have I have access to adjacent power capacity.
Right. So, anybody with power lines or a gas pipeline on their property now.
Which is kind of true.
Yeah. Well, yes and no.
It's not to the level which I think, but there are certain elements that are true.
Absolutely. And so now what even further, we're seeing this proliferate into gas markets, which we hadn't seen before. And a lot of that is because—
You're talking natural gas.
Correct. That's because a lot of data centers now are actually moving to look at doing
on-prem distributed natural gas generation.
Right. And so that is a whole different ball game. It's something that most of these folks have never messed with before. It has a lot of complexity kind of all over the place to it. And that's an area that we're helping, a lot of people kind of demystify and figure out on a bunch of different scales, a bunch of different technology types right now. And so, you're just seeing a lot of things that we've just never seen before.
I don't understand how to unpackage some of those complicated things, right? Where the Goldman Sachs report from last September, I think, is the one that we were talking about, where 45 gigs of renewables to meet the demand of the United States before the end of 2030. And that's just on renewables. So I think they said 27 gigs or 60% of that is just going to be natural gas, right? The rest will be some sort of renewable, solar, wind, and it said other, so I don't remember what other.
You're banging into a lot of limits now, and even with labor, like you were talking about, where you're just reaching the physical limits of how fast procurement cycles can run on this type of equipment. And a lot of that, like we talked about last time, is supply chain wasn't designed to move this fast, and you're just dealing with massive pieces of equipment that are extremely critical, extremely dangerous when operating, and it just never has moved at this pace. But the other thing that's really shifting on the electrical utility side is just in the past, we've never seen utilities after issuing a DSA or a load extension agreement start pulling stuff back.
Yeah, like what we saw with Dominion in Virginia.
Yeah, and it's happened in a number of other places now that we've started to see that as well. And the reality is the utility is never going to take risk on a $500 million building. That's not their problem. It's not their fault. And they're going to do everything they can to get power there. And utilities have always been long power. And so this really hasn't been a concern before legally, that a lot of these documents don't have damages and aren't, fully binding. It's
because they always knew they'd have more capacity than they ever needed.
Right. And that's what they were in the business to do, is get lines there and sell power. And utilities are also being asked to do transmission interconnections at a scale that they've just never done. I mean, we were talking to utility the other day that they've done 2 345 customers on their system in the last 30 years.
30 years.
And they have like 30 requests right now for 345 kV interconnections. So obviously
there's like 2,400 different grid interconnection requests in the United States.
It's insane. I mean, last I've heard, Encore South Dallas is now to 80 gigs. Like, that's more than the whole market almost, right? It's an 86 gig market. So that's not real. And I think this is part of, like, to your point, everybody's throwing out gigawatts, and I need, 50 gigawatts, and I need $400 billion I'm going to deploy. And all these numbers are just kind of crazy and all over the place. And so, there's a whole lot of things to deal with this demand, right? The first off is, like, every utility pretty much in the United States at this point is tapped out.
Yeah.
And most of them have an insane queue on the load side that they've never had before. And this is something we talked about on the DCAC is you've always had a big queue that's moving around. A lot of it doesn't show up on the gen side. I mean, there's like 2,600 gigs in the national interconnect right now for gen. A huge percentage of that won't show up. An overwhelming majority of that is interruptible and renewable and storage. And obviously there's massive amounts of procurement that has to go on to make those kind of projects happen. They're very subsidy dependent. And so naturally and always, a lot of that hasn't showed up. But, some of the things like the amount of solar in Texas is, totally eclipsed what was there in 2010. So some of that has continued to grow. But even on the supply chain, on everything from transformers to, SF6 breakers are the longest pole in the tent for a lot of folks. Generators for engines are, starting to get tapped out. Turbines are years out. There's this whole challenge with air permitting, and what is that going to look like, as we've changed administration here, by the time
what's the new regulation going to look like?
Right. And then the big bifurcation between regulated and deregulated markets. And so it's just it wasn't uncommon 5-10 years ago to build a several $100 million plant, and you're not really concerned that the utility isn't going to bring power. Like, they might be a month late, there might be a construction delay or some kind of issue, but you weren't looking for some kind of binding agreement from them that has some kind of liquidated damages in it.
If they don't show up, yeah.
Right. And I don't see a utility ever doing that. So that's one of the things we've been having to help customers get comfortable with attorneys on, is like, listen, they're not going to take that risk. Like, that's just not their business. They'll get you power, but they're going to get it as fast as they can. But a lot of that is dependent on gen showing up somewhere else in their system, either them building that into their rate base, and how is that going to work in a regulated market, or in a deregulated market, building that out. And one of the challenges is, and you're seeing this in Texas, is, renewables have a very depressing effect on overall power prices, which has made it, difficult for.
Why is that?
Because, solar has a very consistent load shape, right? And especially in Texas, when you have the West Texas grid is so far west in the central time zone that you're getting late afternoon sun that would meet that peak. And so now you're getting this weird handoff at 8 p.m. at night, but a lot of that, critical afternoon peaking prices that a lot of, especially peaker gas plants depended on is gone because solar's just there. And so then on top of that, if the wind is blowing, you get, big time depression of pricing because you have more power than you need. The challenge with that is the intermittency. And so, figuring out how that's going to work. And there's a bunch of, regulatory. Batteries. Yeah. So batteries are great for short term, 2 to 4 hours. And really, quite frankly, batteries are more playing the arbitrage game than anything else right now. And, at the scale we're talking about, the costs here, the procurement of materials to do this kind of stuff in whatever generation you choose is just immense. So, but when you're putting a lot of that effort toward things that are intermittent, then you have to, do a whole lot on top of that to manage the intermittency, where if you're doing that toward sources that aren't intermittent and are really dispatchable, which is namely gas and nuke, it's just a much more reliable. There's not as much you have to procure. And, obviously all of the, environmental benefit and balance has to be balanced here in the interim. And then on top of that, you have a regulatory environment that's trying to figure out how do we, create stability in the market, because at the end of the day, that's the most important thing.
So you have multiple variables, right? You have one, a supply chain of whatever you need, whatever the renewables or the traditional energy solutions are. You have pressures that come from demand, right? So you have supply chain issues, you have demand issues. You have issues with environmental concerns when you go through entitlement and get all your phases or all of your permitting things done. And then at the same time, you have other additional regulatory concerns that fall at the city, county, state, or federal level, right? So we're trying to think about this. There are large hyperscale technology companies today that are losing revenue because they don't have the ability to supply the demand that they have from consumers, whether that's business to business or we as individual consumers. So we have companies, technology companies right now, Facebook, Apple, Microsoft, Google, Amazon, Oracle, et cetera, that are trying to make these massive purchasing decisions. And if they had IT capacity online right now, they'd be selling it to someone else. Mm-hmm. Anybody will buy it from anybody right now as long as they get access to it, right? So we have this unlimited demand of shit. We have a very limited supply chain of things. And we have no idea what's happening in regulation because we're in an election cycle. And about 30 days from now, when there's a new inauguration, we're going to understand what that person's going to come in with in terms of regulations. Mm-hmm. And then we will understand what the ripple effect is at on every other level of government below the federal side. So use your crystal ball right now mm-hmm. and figure out, how do you read the tea leaves? How do you interpret these trends? And what do you anticipate being the greatest things that we should expect to see in 2025, and in which pockets of the United States? I know that the Permian Basin's one. Isn't there one in Pennsylvania or Arkansas or something like that? There's another natural gas.
There's a whole bunch of those.
All over the country?
Not everywhere, but there's a lot of different basins.
Okay, so educate us a little bit on that, because a lot of data center operators today and a lot of these land developers that are sitting on buckets of land and trying to understand the value of it, a lot of it is in Texas. Mm-hmm. Or areas that are in orbit around Texas. But with the deregulated energy market of Texas, it does make Texas extremely appealing to those that need massive volumes of energy. Do you agree? Yeah. So for us, what are you seeing? And if you're talking to the CEO of any operator, it could be Compass, Align, Digital, it doesn't matter. What would you be telling them and advising them right now? Because there's a challenge that's coming, but they don't know what they don't know, right? They just know that they're going to be in a dogfight against everybody else trying to get access to as much power as they can. They're competing against each other. They're competing against their customers for that power. So what should people be doing right now to understand what the market will look like in 2025 with some of these changes based on your experience?
Yeah, I think, well, and listen, I think all of those factors are going on. And then, kind of back to the political realm, like there's a kind of national security, geopolitical piece
That's the
to
last
this,
part, for sure.
Right? Like who wins this race?
So let's talk about that, because for those that are listening, okay, so it's South by Southwest in March, right? I think, are you coming to that? All right, so listen, you have to. I'm hosting an after party. I got Chris Crosby of Compass. I got Dana Adams of Vantage, the president of the Americas. And then I have Christian Bellotti, of former Microsoft, now Digital Bridge. And the four of us are going to be doing a panel on the fifth industrial revolution, really talking about this massive demand of power, okay? But at the after party that we're hosting, I'm doing one with national security and defense, because there's so many aspects of IT that come from, the capitalization of it. Unless people can make it financially accretive and economically efficient, if they can't find a predictable return, they're not going to invest into that asset, right? So we have to understand how those pressures from regulatory, supply chain, demand, and everything else also are constricted by those on the finance side that are like, well, look, it's all great. You guys figure out all that brain damage because I want to figure out how I could invest into it and what those returns are going to look like. So you have those things. But let's talk about what's happening right now. I read the OpenAI report from like 2 months ago, and I think I sent it to you. And what was troubling to me was that China itself has, in the last 2 years, authorized the beginning of the construction of 10 nuclear reactors per year for the last 2 years. Actually, this last year, they authorized 11, and they're deploying billions of dollars into their reactors. There's no one on this earth building more nuclear reactors right now than China. And we have to ask ourselves, okay, we have these regulatory restrictions, we have supply chain challenges, we have capital constraints because it has to be something that makes money. And then we have a lot of demand requirements that are coming from multiple different arenas. The operators and their clients are both competing for the same amount of power. From a national security perspective, we can't afford to let those factors stop us from evolving, because whoever owns power, every industrial revolution, we're in the fifth. Each of the previous industrial revolutions have been predicated on a campaign and a theory of power, whether the first one was the steam engine, the second was AC and DC power in the automobile, third was fission, fusion, nuclear reactors, Department of Energy created all kinds of things around energy, but we were using energy in the fourth, the power was AI, right? So now we're in the fifth, and we're trying to figure out, we have a 5-year head start over China with regards to national security and defense with what we do on AI. They've stated they're going to overtake us by 2030. Our head start really is predicated on the fact that we were the pioneers behind mainframes, and we have more of them in our workforce in America than anywhere else. In addition to that, we also were the first to really start deploying fiberglass throughout the country in the 90s. So all that fiber that we deployed in the 90s and all those mainframes we started delivering in the 60s really gave us the head start that we have right now over China, which, make no mistake, technology, the most advanced weapons, machinery, and technology ever built will always be found first in the government sector, traditionally in the military, for national defense and intelligence. The very first data center ever built was for national defense and intelligence. So we're sitting here going, we have all these things that we have to figure out. And at the same time, you're like, I don't like reactors, not over here, not over there either. Well, what do you think about China and all of their allies who may not share the same thoughts or beliefs or practices or principles that we have, now have the ability to have the dominance in AI, which gives them, because they have the dominance over the energy to support the adoption rate of emerging technology, specifically the surge of AI, then what you're going to have is you're going to have them owning technology, and that advantage, it does give them a technological and a revolutionary war type of advantage. I mean, technology has revolutionized war from the very beginning of time when Abe Lincoln was using a telegram to talk to his generals on the front line. Right. So if you think about it, do we really want to let all of these regulatory issues, the supply chain issues, the margins that we must make in returns get in the way of national security and defense? It's two parts. There's two sides of this coin. I focus on this podcast hard on the technology side. Soon, like I just did a podcast with Mike Sorelli, where we are talking only about national security and defense, because if we lose the advantage over AI, if you think AI is not a weapon, you're out of your mind, right? And if we don't own that, then we're in a very difficult place of concern as a nation and globally, and we don't have a choice but to address the national security side of this. So, I try to bifurcate those two and address them.
But it's hard to do.
It's impossible to do. I'm more focused on the national security side, if I'm being honest.
Yeah, well, I think, listen, at the end of the day, I'm always going to bet on American innovation and, the entrepreneurial spirit of this country. And, China has a lot less regulatory things that they have to worry about or care about.
They have what they call a socialist market economy, which means everything's owned by the CCP. So it's not unusual for their government to invest into these businesses that are incubators for this type of technology, whereas our government's letting the free market do it.
Well, but they also kind of have a complete disregard for the environment, no matter what is said, and also for human rights, no matter what is said.
And the waste and the pollutions.
Right. So when you eliminate all those kind of constraints, you can do a lot.
Yeah.
Does that allow you to innovate? TBD. But I think where America still has a huge opportunity is we have the innovation, and we do genuinely care about the environment, and we do genuinely care about human rights. And the only way we lose this is if we constrain ourselves. And I think the
self-imposed constraints,
right? Self-imposed constraints that are draconian and maybe unnecessary,
outdated,
right? And so part of that, though, is there isn't a whole lot of capital constraint going on right now. Like capital's just flowing like crazy. And AI doesn't make money yet, but at the same time, like when I'm looking, just industrial robots and automation is just mind-blowing what that could do as far as efficiency and a lot of these supply chain, issues that we're having. And so in a lot of ways, I'm seeing the validation of how this is, at our national meeting in October, I put up a news clipping from early 2000s talking about how the internet was still a fad. And a lot of this feels like this is an order of magnitude bigger, just fundamental shift in the way everything's going to function. And it took the internet, a decade to figure out how it really makes money and flows, and a whole lot of capital got set on fire, but a whole lot of capital, provided infinite returns to where we are now.
So let's talk about that, because it is a capital game right now. It's
100%.
not that there's access to capital. It says, like when I tell people that it took 46 years before 1 in 4 Americans adopted electricity in their home from the time it came out, it's because the people that provided that product didn't know how to monetize it and make money. Same with the connectivity, which was the third utility, which was a copper wire in your home. It wasn't until people figured out how to monetize it and make a business out of it where it became easier for people to adopt. Same as on what we're doing right now. Data centers are more than 30 years old, right? But technically,
the adoption of each one of these things is happening at a faster and faster rate. You see some of these, how fast did the internet get to this? How fast did some of these, different technology companies get adoption on different products?
Like Facebook took almost 5 years to get to 100 million users. It took
ChatGPT
5 days, but it took TikTok 9 months. So you're right, the adoption rate of these trends are faster, but it also means the unintended consequences from the bad habits of adopting this technology is easier to shed.
Totally. So that's the challenge that has to be faced right now, is how are we going to tackle this in there's kind of two layers to it, right? There's obviously the private enterprise, which is leading the charge and deploying an insane amount of capital. Obviously, in this market also, there's government demand for government data centers and all that kind of piece. And then overarching that is the regulatory environment on kind of two different levels. So one is nationally, what are we doing with things like air permitting and, the regulatory permitting, and how is that going to get built with as regards to nuclear, and is there going to be changes there? And then below that is a whole level of local regulatory environments that are completely different, even within the same state. You've got in even deregulated states, you've got regulated co-ops and utilities that operate very differently than the deregulated portions of those states, and a whole lot of kind of interesting dynamics that are, going on there, where you're now moving in loads that are bigger than that entire utility. And that utility has already, been outsourcing that to somebody else. And sometimes that's worked well and sometimes it hasn't. And now you're going to subject yourself to, someone that may or may not, understand how to manage that kind of risk better than you do. And now you have data centers that are managing risk that and a lot of them aren't doing it yet, but are about to. manage risk they've never managed before. I mean, you look at a lot of these, gigawatt scale campuses that have been, managed by the hyperscalers. A lot of them are regulated markets, where they haven't really had to really deal with the dynamics of literally the most inelastic commodity on earth. And that's a whole nother game. And then layer on that, at the end of the day, like it or not, gas is the marginal fuel in almost every market, in the United States.
What do you mean by that? It's the marginal fuel. It's like the most economically efficient?
No, it's what actually drives the price on the margin, which is what drives the volatility. And so, being able to understand gas markets, gas transportation, nominations and balancing, operational flow orders, all of this stuff, which are completely foreign concepts to most data center operators as they've avoided.
Yeah, the space power and the cooling was the product and some connectivity that went with it. Now that I have to figure out how to hedge against the grid with regards to how I'm going to adopt and use energy.
And which is very expensive and very risky. And there is no commodity market that is more violent than power. I mean, there is no commodity that goes.
Tell people how often it shifts. Again, you've told me this.
Every 15 minutes.
But okay, so walk through that volatility from a 12-hour cycle to a 24-hour cycle. I know there's a lot of shifts within 15 minutes, but isn't there some other bigger shifts?
So the thing you have to understand about power is it's literally rebalanced every few seconds. And so any kind of disturbance, I'm dealing with this with a customer out in the Northwest right now, any kind of disturbance on that power system knocks their entire plant down, and restarting takes 24 hours. And they get knocked out in a third of a second. So the stability in voltage and frequency across the system is critical, and the grid has to maintain that perfectly every few seconds, and even intra-second anomalies can cause really significant problems for big loads. And so what that does is you have this diversity in the gen stack, which is important, right? Like Nuke just wants to run flat out, leave me alone. I'm going to bid in at zero. I'm going to take whatever you give me because, my fuel effectively doesn't have a market that's costing me, money on a daily or monthly basis. And then you have, renewables that are basically must take. So when they're on, you need to take them. And when they're off, you got to go find something else. And then you have dispatchable sources of energy like coal. Fluidized bed coal doesn't really like to turn on and off. And most of that's gone. It's bleeding out of most of the markets in the United States now. And then you have gas, and that comes in two different flavors. One's a combined cycle plant that really wants to run all the time, and running at 100% is when it's most efficient. And so that's cheaper than a peaker plant, which is literally the same as a jet engine off an airplane that's mechanically turning a generator that can start up very, very quickly. Not nearly as fast as like a diesel fast start generator at a data center, but it's, a pretty quick generation source. And then the last piece, which really materially only still exists in the Northeast, is oil. And you still have a not huge, but decent fleet of diesel generators in the Northeast. The gas infrastructure up there is just so constrained, and they haven't wanted to build any new gas pipes. And so the irony of that is you end up with still generate power plants that have massive diesel tanks that will run on diesel, right? Because you have to make sure that gas gets to homes. And there's even systems up there that are propane pipelines, just because of the constraint in the New England market. So all of this is being managed literally every few seconds, and then rebalanced like every 5 minutes, and then repriced every 15 minutes. And this is a market. I mean, in Texas, it can go from negative $20 to $5,000 a megawatt hour, in 15 minutes.
So how do you, as an operator, how do you protect yourself against those?
There's all sorts of hedging strategies and different ways to participate in that market. And that's the complexity of management that a lot of these data centers, some of them are going to run into like a buzzsaw. And, there's utilities in Texas that are co-ops that are paying $20 to $25 million a year for the next 28 years because their generation failed during 1 week during Uri. And that's 1 week. And now as a private enterprise, you don't get to pay that out on a bond over 28 years. It's here's the payment, you got 48 hours or you're out. And so I think what a lot of people are going to start to understand too is the way that you've traditionally paid a power bill is not the way wholesale power works. The utilities are paying that bill every week and then compiling that into a monthly bill and then giving you 20 days to pay whatever you negotiated. So when you start participating in the wholesale market, transactions are flowing much faster, capital is flowing much faster, volatility is wildly higher, and the strategies around managing that are really complex. And that's what we're helping a lot of people navigate and understand and get ahead of, because you're going to see some financial catastrophe.
Absolutely. This is a part of the game that we're just getting introduced to, right? Yeah. So you're talking about the most volatile commodity, the most, on earth, being introduced to us to where now people like these data center operators are being asked to provide the product itself, the data center infrastructure, the connectivity, the long pole in the tent used to be, backup engines. And now they're asked to do their own. A lot of these operators, I've sat down with operators like, we're never going to be our own utility. Yep. And I'm like, that's going to be really challenging then for some of the markets you're going to go into to be competitive, because you're going to have no choice but to do on-prem self-generation. Am I wrong?
Yeah. I mean, this is already happening. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, we're helping several.
Some are just doing it to have the edge, but now I'm like, there's going to be a point where you won't be able to compete unless you do this.
Right.
They don't have a choice but to go find somebody who plays in your world, who has to understand the data center industry like you've been trying to do for the last year and a half or so, or however long you've been working, trying to understand how to interpret what we do on this side and how it translates to what the needs are on that side, because we haven't figured that out yet. We are still in the earliest of stages. Don't you agree?
Yeah, and the challenge is it's not just understanding power markets, right? There's a lot of people that have managed, there aren't a ton of people out there that have managed big industrial loads. There's a ton of people that mess with smaller commercial stuff, which is also a totally different game. But you also need to understand gas markets. Yeah. You also need to understand gas infrastructure and how all that interconnection works. Like we're seeing people paying $50 million for something that should cost 20. And then you've got to understand the generation stack and how that works, as well as the power infrastructure, transmission, substations, distribution, all the relaying and all how that works. And then you've got the regulatory environment on top of that. And so all of those languages have to be spoken fluently by someone that's going to go get into the game of having basically their own power company on site, which is not just going to be obviously providing them power, but on the backside of that is this entire interaction. And here's the thing, if you understand how to do it and you're doing it well, that will be another profit center for data centers. And there's a lot of ways where data centers are going to become a very positive interaction with the grid. But there's a lot of ways where data centers are going to do dumb things and be a real liability to the grid. And I think we're going to see that play out in the next 24 to 36 months.
Where the data center turns into a utility provider almost in a way?
Yes, or provides a significant asset to that utility as far as being able to help and support. But I also think you're going to see some dumb mistakes and stumbles where it destabilizes a grid and everybody freaks out. Okay, how do we fix this? And that's one of the things too, is that when you're designing a plant, especially at these scales, there's a lot of things that you need to think about and do that a normal power plant would never do, because probably it's not economic. But in this situation,
because it's more like a microgrid, that's why. Right. They're dealing with one asset typically. And, well, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe.
But think about how many entities out there are wanting as many nines as a data center wants. Sure. Like there just aren't that many. And so a lot of industries, it's more economic to take a blip and deal with a 3-hour shutdown or a 1-day shutdown than to build all this totally insane redundancy where you don't even have, milliseconds of problems.
So utility is 99.9%, right? Is that about right? So we as a data center provider, data center industry runs at 5 nines at a minimum typically, right? A lot of people, we're at 7 nines or whatever. And the truth is, it doesn't matter because they're all signing 100% to an SLAs, for most of their clients anyway. So they have zero downtime designed into a product that doesn't offer.
The challenge with that though is that looks at downtime as outage. Right. So if I tell you that I have 98% uptime, I've got however many hours, which is a material number of hours when there's 8,760 hours in a year, unless it's leap year. But, 2% downtime is a lot of downtime, right? But people think of downtime as an outage. Well, if a utility only has 3 minutes of outage over the course of a year, or even if it has 25 seconds of outage over the course of a year, but 25 different times they destabilize voltage for a third of a second, that can knock a facility down for a significant period of time. So that's why you have UPSs and a lot of these things that can instantly swap away from something like that, wait, watch the grid to stabilize, and then come back. And so a lot of this resiliency and redundancy is going to look very different than it has in the past, because you're taking what you were, doing with 5 nines or whatever at 50 megawatts, 100 megawatts, and now you're trying to scale that to 2 gigs. Very different ballgame. Just the scale and magnitude of it.
I think that it's a ball game difference that we can't calculate yet, because the more pressure we continue to put on all these grid operators, the less reliable it's going to be until we find a bridging solution over the next 3 to 4 years, right? Mm-hmm. So I mean, like, we're going to start experiencing probably, let's say, take away the fact that we're getting ready to roll into the winter, mm-hmm. and we're going to go through the next 3 months, which will typically be the hardest 3 or 4 months in the United States from a weather perspective, which is where we see a lion's share of our downtime caused due to
storms and that kind of stuff. Yeah.
So you're going to have that while simultaneously knowing that everybody's racing and putting pressure on these grid providers or utility providers. And then you have people that are going to be like, hey, I'm going to go out there, I'm going to build a data center, I'm going to buy enough land to put my own power plant on that to support just that one data center. And I'm going to do that multiple times. Yeah. We're going to see issues. Do you agree? We're going to see a lot more issues over the next 12 months.
Yes, but here's the thing, and this is why there's such a constraint, right? Is utilities have a very structured plan, and always have, of I'm going to have at least 2 paths to serve 110% of the load at this substation. And I'm not putting any more load on that substation until I can meet that, or maybe even increase the reliability of that. So the grid operators have built a very significant amount of redundancy by and large. There's obviously exceptions, but overwhelmingly, grid operators understand this is critical. I mean, you think about a power outage in 1920 was annoying, and you went and lit some candles or whatever. It's like life-threatening.
Yeah,
now because of how much is dependent on electricity. And so that resiliency and redundancy that's being built into the grid is part of this backlog, right? So there's going to be issues with ice storms and this kind of stuff, and they build in as much contingency as they can. But there's certain areas, the Northeast, for example, where you're just going to get pummeled, just
inevitable.
Right, and like there's only so much you can do against a tornado. Look what happened in North Carolina. I mean, there's 160 substations that got mangled or beat up. It was crazy. And again, on the supply chain, right? And this is why the utilities have this, mutual aid contracts with each other, where they're sending folks from one side to the other, and those, men and women are out there working, 20-hour days for a week and a half to get everything back online, because it's that critical. But where this is going to, shift to a place that it's never gone before is, it's one thing to go out there on an island and build your own generation. And there's a couple of people that are doing that or have done that right now. And that's a very different world when you're running your own island than being interconnected to the grid, because being interconnected to the grid is much more stable than running an island. But connecting to the grid and interacting with the grid is also very complicated, and there's a whole bunch of relaying, coordination, and other things that have to be done there. And so this is going to be a very material shift for utilities across the United States, moving from a model where you have people that just built gen. Most of them have very little, if some parasitic load on site, but that's about it. And they're just interacting with the market on a wholesale level. And that's kind of what those people have experienced. And the utility has basically been moving power from them to, an overwhelming majority of load that has no backup gen. And some customers that have backup gen, most of which are on there, I will never curtail you unless I absolutely have to, or something critically go to a hospital. Now you move into this model where you get massive utility scale gen with massive load behind the fence that's now going to dynamically interact with the utility market. That's a huge shift in model, and it can work well, but you've got to understand all of the components around it.
How do you understand all those things? That's so much data to try to.
I mean,
okay, but is that
nerd like me?
Well, I mean,
it's just like this is the world I've lived in for 15 years, and it's going to be a very steep learning curve. But people are going to get up that learning curve. I mean, it's in people I've talked to. I mean, you look at how many people understand somewhat gas markets that didn't even know what a pipeline was 6-9 months ago, right?
Sure.
You've got to get up that curve, and it's gas infrastructure, gas markets, power infrastructure in the gen stack, and regulatory environments. And all of those things are interacting with each other fluently in real time.
How is, I know you guys have a software. Do you guys have the ability to kind of tie into the dynamics of those things in real time? And what are the things that you're tying into then? Are you tying into Centerpoint Energy in Houston as an example, or NRG? Or
So there's a couple of things you're primarily tying into. One is the load and understanding what the load's doing. The other,
how do you get that load data though? Like, what are you tying into?
All real-time power metering. So
okay.
you're tied in.
You're getting that from the utilities?
No. Well, you can get it from the utilities. Is that
public information, I guess?
No. So most of the stuff you're going to get from the utility is going to be super outdated. One of the interesting things that's happened is you've had this massive rollout of smart meters. We'll call them smart. But that rollout's happened over the last 15 years, right? So a lot of that technology was designed, 17 to 20 years ago, got rolled out 15 to 10 years ago. And so it's not brand new technology, right? And so there's still a gap in how fast a lot of that data comes day behind, which is useless in a real-time market. So that's where, for a lot of our customers, we're going out there and actually installing real-time data where I can get it either instantaneously if it's needed, or on a 5-minute basis, so that you can really understand how that load's interacting with the market in real time. But you've got to understand how the load's, what the load's doing, what the power gen is doing, what the gas flow is doing, and then you've got to understand how the market is functioning both on the power and gas side in real time. And then there's a whole ancillary markets. Like there's a tremendous amount of complexity, because all of this stuff has to, again, distill down to that rebalancing in the market every couple seconds.
So I wonder, I get asked a lot about this industry, those that have been in this industry for a long time. Your industry's been around since how long, right? It's one of the...
Yeah, deregulation in material form rolled out in like 2000.
How many states?
Deregulation was long before that.
How many states are deregulated when it comes to energy?
So fully deregulated, it's basically Texas, Illinois, and then the whole PJM market up into New York ISO and then New England ISO, with the exception of Vermont, are fully deregulated. Now, there's a bunch of states that are partially deregulated. California is partially deregulated, Oregon's partially deregulated, Michigan's partially deregulated, Arizona's partially deregulated. You have a ability to choose your provider when you start in Georgia. So there's a whole bunch of complexity across a bunch of different markets. That's all for power. Gas is, basically deregulated almost everywhere. As in some markets, you need to be above a certain threshold. And then, power markets on a wholesale level in most places are deregulated as well, and with wheeling and some of that stuff.
Well, I asked that question because I'm like, does that make it easier for these operators to turn themselves into utility providers in some respects, even though they're only supporting themselves?
Well, but this is understanding all these dynamics is really critical in the whole site selection process. And a lot of people are figuring this out the hard way. I've got transmission lines and a gas pipe, so we're good to go. Oh, there's no capacity on that pipe, so I have no firm gas, and there's no capacity on the transmission line, and here's what it costs to rebuild. And I think that's one of the other interesting things too is, there's all this talk about building massive amounts of transmission infrastructure.
Which will probably never happen though, right?
Right. Well, for a couple of reasons. One, because it's insanely expensive, which the procurement cycle is super long. But then two, there's all these people that don't want transmission lines blowing through their property. And I think that's where you're going to get the biggest pushback. But at the end of the day, the whole reason you would need that is gen's way over here and data center's way over here. Right. And I think that's the other real problem that's getting fixed by doing on-site generation and becoming a net asset to a grid rather than, somewhat of a liability. But and it's not even that you're a liability. It's just you're so big in a lot of these smaller markets, especially, that you kind of destabilize it and you're forcing somebody else to come build this power plant so that you can have this data center and then someone to build transmission lines to connect the two.
What are some of the common things that you're seeing from operators that reach out to you today and they have a request and, It doesn't take much in this game at all. Even on the data center side, I've been on programs before where you could look to the left for 3 hours too long and you go $500,000 backwards on a program, right? Because it's part of human nature. There's always going to be a part of this that is going to be subject to the risk of a human being making a bad decision, not making them a bad person, but we just make mistakes, right? So what are some of the things that you see when people are coming to you? Are you guiding them from driving their bus into the ditch because they're going to invest into a pipeline here, or they're going to buy some sort of rate table for something there? Like, what are some of the most common things that you're seeing that operators are reaching out to you guys for to help navigate them out of something?
I mean, a couple areas. So one is understanding the difference between what a utility thinks they can do and what a utility is committed to doing. And I think a lot of people are learning that lesson the hard way. There's some data centers out there that are half built that
their utility's never going to follow through.
Yeah. And so then the pivot is, okay, we're going to go to gas. And, a lot of them have never messed with gas before. And so then they're getting taken advantage of to the tune of tens of millions in some cases on laterals.
I have learned that the gas ecosystem is dodgy as fuck. Is the best way I'll say it.
The intrastate pipeline world is tough. You got to understand what you're doing. Interstates regulated by FERC, much more transparent. Rate cases take a long time. If they're making more money than they should, you can actually claw it back. We've participated in some of those. But intrastate pipes are typically just governed by the local, utility board within that state, or, in Texas, the Railroad Commission. And it's not to say that midstream companies are bad. They're not. But there's just much less regulation. And, if you're not aware of what's going on. And we've even seen some cases where major engineering firms have recommended, so-and-so pipeline company. And they're like, all right, sweet. These guys were recommended by so-and-so. And it's like, okay, that's literally more than 2x what that should cost.
Oof.
But, it is what it is, right? So navigating that well and understanding that. And the other challenge too is, we're seeing a lot of the data centers companies are now trying to kind of build an internal energy team. And you bring in a bunch of people that have kind of had unique but somewhat siloed experience. And then you're trying to cobble that together and quarterback that, which is really hard. And that's where, additional mistakes can get made and not having kind of fluent interaction.
I wonder, again, going back, we talk about the adoption rate of things and where they become mainstream. Think about from the time that we created power flight to the time that it's used like it is today. Someone had to figure out how to make money off airplanes before. If they didn't, then airplanes just would have been a cool hobby for guys that had bikes back in the day, right? So the reality is, I don't know what it was, but if the automotive industry chugged along for 46 years before it was quote unquote mainstream, and if the connectivity or the phone companies chugged along for 27 years before they became mainstream, I don't know what it is that pulled those things into mainstream, but it had to have been the complications of nature for them to continue to scale as an industry, where regulatory groups had to come in and establish boundaries set upon ethics, perhaps, where they came in and say, hey, look, maybe it's the same as medicine. Hey, you want to perform those types of services? That's great. Let's talk about the infrastructure that you're going to do those services in. You can't just go to a building that has the same infrastructure as a Denny's and open heart surgery someone, or do brain surgery, right? There needs to be a level of reliability in that infrastructure to support those level of services. And I'm beginning to discover that national security is a big driver to everything that we're doing. We as consumers are driving, the eyeball content, video caching, things at the cloud was really driving for us. But national security and the pressure that this industry is going to put on the utility providers and the oil and gas industry as a whole is what's going to probably in the next few quarters help produce or push this industry from, let's say we're kickball today. We could be as big as the NFL by the end of 2025 in terms of sports. That's how big of a tipping point we're ready to reach, because you and I are looking below the waterline and we're seeing how, what the rest of the world in the media sees is the tip of the iceberg. They're now talking about these things and they're like, oh my God, look at the size of that iceberg.
Yeah. And like everything else, there's so much incorrect or misinformation out there of people that are just trying to put something out quickly. And it's like, that's not how that works.
Well, the worst part is you're spot on. The worst part is I'm catching a lot of shit where people are putting dopey information out that's really designed for clickbait. So they're using a theme of fear for everything because sadly, for now, fear seems to be one of those things that people use to try to get attention the most. And I saw something that I posted on my social media and it was pretty stupid, but it was like 600,000 people are going to die from pneumonia and asthma by the end of 2030 as a byproduct of the adoption rate of more data centers being generated. And it's like, I think that they don't realize that by then we'll have pivoted a large volume of energy that we use to a different renewable energy source that's less likely to create as many pollutants. But they're absolutely right. Perhaps if we only use dirty coal and fossil fuels, and we only did that between now and 2030 to meet the demand that we have of data centers, maybe that would create another
it also
China.
Makes the assumption that fossil fuel emissions technology isn't going to change. And there's massive shifts coming there too.
Is there really?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Well, that's actually pretty encouraging to hear. I think that there's a lot of things to be hopeful about. I think I look at the fact that we're having these conversations as the fact that there's going to have to be, I was just reading something where we have 478 federal agencies. We create 2 new federal agencies every year. Maybe the Doge will fix that, right? The Doge or whatever. But the reality is we have to unpeel back some of these wasteful ones, but we do need a bridging authority, like an authority that has jurisdiction over the branches that connect the demand from data centers from a utility perspective or energy perspective to the capabilities and limitations of the U.S. grid, right?
Well, part of that is that there's a big national security component built into the gas grid and power infrastructure. So like we saw with the Colonial Pipeline, someone hacks a SCADA system and starts to play with valves and stuff, huge problem. So even one of the things that we're seeing that customers are getting frustrated by that we've had to explain to them is a utility is going to explain to you what they're going to do on the physical interconnections that they're making with you right now. Like we're building a couple of breaker and a half stations that are pretty sizable with the utility right now. And all of that is openly discussed and how the design and relaying schemes and those things need to all be coordinated with the utility because those are going to actually physically interact. There's a whole bunch in the background that the utility is doing in transmission projects within their system to reinforce things to be able to make this load actually be able to come online and interact with the greater RTO. They can't share any of that with us, right? Because that's not public information, because that information actually understands the weaknesses and vulnerabilities of that situation. And like we've seen with some of these instances of, that instance in California where people shot at the substation, you're now seeing people build walls around substations
100%.
so you can't have line of sight. Same thing's true with the gas grid, is there's a lot that can't be shared for national security reasons. And even a lot of that mapping is still held behind kind of a national security fence just for, terrorism, because we understand that destabilizing that or, playing on the vulnerabilities of some of those systems is really critical and important. So there's a whole bunch of different layers of complexity here that all need to be really effectively managed when you're kind of in a lot of ways completely reinventing the way some of these grids are going to operate, especially in these, major data center markets.
Man, so much to unpackage with this. I do think that there has to be some sort of new, I like this industry a lot. We self-impose a lot of our governance today. You have guys like Dean Nelson are putting together, infrastructure masons, which are trying to take an industry and make it mainstream. You have to stabilize it. You have to stabilize that industry. And typically you do that by putting some regulations and some ethics and things like that around it. And then you could standardize on it, right? And once you standardize on that and people understand the lexicon, then you could optimize within that industry. But we're taking 2 industries that are adjacent to each other but operating in orbit of each other and now on a collision course between energy and compute capacity. And we have national security and defense issues. Like I just listened to a podcast on Sean. Have you ever listened to the Sean Ryan podcast? Mm-hmm. He just had a return guest on, and she is a CIA targeter, right? Okay. And she is talking about, there's factions between Al-Qaeda and ISIS and Taliban and EIIO, but you have this Islamic military group that is led by Osama bin Laden's older son, who's not even supposed to be alive, right? And Uthman bin Laden, or whatever his name is decided to take a different route than his father, which is to make sure that they maximize the impact that they can make on U.S. soil. And they want to do it while not taking credit for anything. They just want to keep their head down and be shut. And we know between all of the intel that we've created that there's a lot of people that made it through the southern border, but we are estimating that at least 1,000 of them that came through are military-aged people that they're not just from Afghanistan, they're North Koreans, they're, Iranians,
Chinese.
And they're using, Russian supply chain assets and pipeline, capabilities to move things around. But 2025 looks like an inevitability. What happened on October 7th in 2023 was actually scheduled to happen on October 7th, 2022. Those dates that they attack us on are very symbolic, but there are things that are inevitable. And one of the things that's also inevitable is that we're going to have some sort of conflict, whether it's suicide bombers going to college campuses and clacking off vests, or, by the way, we don't have suicide bombers on U.S. soil. We've never had that. We had one person try to do that once years ago in his own car outside of an AT&T, but we've never really seen that. That's true terror, right? There's a lot of things that are going to be coming, but the attack of our infrastructure, like, do they want to go attack the Empire State Building or other symbols of our nation's strength, or are they going to go cripple us by attacking our infrastructure? And whether they take down a bridge or they take down a substation, either way, they're going to harm our nation, and it's inevitable. It sounds like by the end of 2025, there will be another homeland attack on U.S. soil that's going to be very coordinated with, let's say 800 to 900 of those people made it through the Mexico border, but some of them came on, with American visas and flew in here. We will see setbacks in this industry that are self-imposed because we're growing and emerging, but there's going to be probably some sort of attack on the mainstream, on the mainland in the same group that attacked, Israel on October 7th. It's the same coalition of Islamic military groups that are all patched together with people that some want to go fight to the death, some want to go die in the effort of doing it, and some want to remain alive and tell the story so they can rage fear down on all of us. Either way, we have two of the most important industries ever invented. Oil and gas is massive. Without it, it's life safety. But without the technology, compute capacity that we have, now we're talking about national security and defense issues that make...
Well, the more that gets integrated into everyday part of life, the more that gets important. But that, I think, is, again, why the resiliency and redundancy is built into the system. Is if you take out this substation, fine, these three will back it up until I get this rebuilt. Because that's one of the big things people are figuring out real fast about transmission infrastructure. The reason you have rolling blackouts is you immediately have to protect transmission infrastructure. And if you let the voltage get out of control and the amperage get out of control and your frequency get out of
catastrophic
control, you can destroy transmission assets, which now everybody's understanding aren't something you get off the shelf.
We're 2 generations behind on those.
Yeah, it could take 18 months to replace a piece of equipment. And so the whole reason that we have the ability to shut pieces of the grid down and understand what to shut down and where, which, like Texas, for example, has had to come a long way. I don't remember if that outage we had in, I think it was 2011 during the Super Bowl. And, they were shutting off entire parts of West Texas where they were shutting off the gas compressor stations that were feeding the power plants. So then they have to throw everything back on, right? So a lot more has been done to refine when I need to protect the grid. How do I do that with, a scalpel instead of a machete? So part of the way we do defend ourselves, and, I hope it's not an inevitability, but listen, they're just bad actors out there, So
they didn't come here for no reason, and America knows that they're here.
Totally. And so to protect yourself from that, all of that is how you build resiliency and redundancy. Like I was talking to a pipeline company the other day, under the river, they got 2 pipes. In case someone drops an anchor or messes something up, they can flip it over to the other one. Their customers aren't disrupted, because if that were to get disrupted, it would take, weeks, if not months to fix. And if it's in January, there's a whole bunch of people that could freeze to death.
Yeah.
So building in the redundancy and resiliency of the gas and power grid and the overall energy infrastructure, and making that as robust as possible. But when, not if, something gets taken down, whether it's from weather or whether it's from a bad actor or just someone doing something stupid, which is going to happen nature. Also, you have
Why'd you look at me when you said stupid? I got it.
I'll look at the corner. But all of that is part of why this is so complex.
Yeah.
And this is why it's really important to understand the landscape. And there's a lot of things that, everybody's just trying to move as fast as they can right now because there's a huge opportunity, once in a generation, maybe not once in a lifetime, opportunity in front of us in this AI space. And it's not just AI, it's all of this data. I mean, when you start deploying all of these robots that are using AI, they're going to be creating an insanely
amount of data.
Yeah, and just orders of magnitude more. And all of that has to live somewhere, and it needs power to exist. And so the resiliency and redundancy of this has to grow from where it is now and can't degrade at all. And so that's where a lot of these utilities are having to move slow because they have to make sure that whatever they're adding still fits in with this highly resilient plan that they're required to design. And a lot of this, as you start adding a huge amount of gen that has very significant load behind the fence, because that's probably where all this is going to go. And whether that's gas or nuke and or combination of both, which is probably most likely, that is a totally different animal than the grid is dealing with currently. And that's where on a national level, we're going to need to do a lot to upgrade how all of these energy infrastructure. It's not just power, it's not just gas, it's all the different regeneration sources that we're using, how different loads interact with the grid. And the beauty of it is this technology provides a lot of ways that we can now interact much faster and more intelligently in these systems. And that's the super exciting innovation.
So what's the guidance that you're telling these people? You have operators that are coming to you, site developers that are coming to you. And we've certainly seen a massive uptick too on the development side where landowners.
It's going crazy.
It's great. It's a great time for us to get in that side because we really have to flex our ecosystem of partners. We have a stable of 3 or 4 partners that we subcontract under us to go figure out everything I need to know for dark fiber as an example, everything I need to know from natural gas or whatever the utility capacity is from whatever substations within a region and all the other areas around that we could draw from. And then understanding whatever the HJ is in those markets to figure out how complicated it is to get a permit in that space and what the entitlement programs look like in the beginning. There's so many things going on because there was a time where we eliminated the risk of the utility provider by simply putting the reliability, like you're talking about how you have 2 pipelines under the water because if someone drops an anchor. Well, we had to, from a technology perspective, take the reliability away from the infrastructure of the MEP and remove it and put it at the IT stack level to where it's now at the network level. Metroactive replication based on network topology capabilities and latency is how we solve the problem of infrastructure reliability because somebody can easily drive a truck right into the substation. There may be a few ballards there, but I'm sure if they want to get creative, they could figure out a way to really harm and take down an entire data center from not even have to set foot inside of it, right? And it could be upstream with that substation to where the primary substation is with diverse paths that are feeding multiple campuses. But we are at risk on this infrastructure, not just from the ability to continue to support the compute demand and growth that we're seeing, but that compute demand and growth really relates to national security and defense issues that we have to make sure that we don't have the ability to, we can't compromise those things. Right. So we're trying to future-proof something while trying to understand how to originate it. So, the soup was never really truly done cooking on what the capabilities and limitations of oil and gas are, but now there's never been more focus and pressure on what the capabilities and limitations of natural gas are, and as well as how long is it going to take to get nuclear here. I have at least 4 nuclear guests that are scheduled to come on in between January and the middle of February, and we're gonna roll up our sleeves and dig deep into that stuff. But I'm also going to be bringing on some of the providers, right? The ones that are manufacturing that stuff to understand what's their intellectual honesty. What are they actually truly saying they're capable of doing versus what are they going to be able to do, right? Because everyone sells ahead of the curve, right? So it's a whole education taking place today. And if I'm a data center owner operator, the greatest risk in this point in time to my business isn't my ability to get land or connectivity. It's probably not even my VMI strategy or my ability to get a labor force mobilized in any market, because I could throw enough money at those things to make that happen. Yeah. I cannot throw money fast enough at power.
Right.
And if I throw money or make long-term decisions into the wrong thing, I could be handcuffed to something on accident that could kill my entire business. Right? Because it doesn't take long to pick the wrong bucket. And then now you're liable to the negatives that come with that bucket. And you didn't understand it. You were only focused on the upside.
And made the commitment before you really understood what you were committing to.
So what are we doing to make this more, what are we doing to protect the operators or the large scale enterprise and users that are doing their own stuff? But what are we doing to educate these people so they understand like, hey, slow down. And adopt some resources or bring on more partners that are strategic that could help navigate around some of these greatest challenges that exist in this industry. The oil and gas industry operates massively different than ours. This industry is, I love the data center industry because you create annuity model based relationships. You're signing 5, 7, 10-year term leases or longer. And the teams that you're using, if they do a good job, you don't typically rip out and replace performing teams as long as they pencil out and they're predictable what you're going to expect and they're pretty reliable. You're not going to go rip out and replace those things. I've always seen the oil and gas side is very transactional based. They don't play the long game on people. They're just more like first come, first serve, bitches. What do you want? And for reality is we're looking at stabilized assets that are going to be there for a long time. And we're going to build a gigawatt at arbitrarily here, 200 megs at a click for 5 years till I get there. Again, arbitrary example where these people are like, I'll sell you the first 200, but first come, first serve for the next, right? So we're trying to figure out how to stabilize. We were pretty optimized as an industry. We were getting really efficient in the way that we utilize energy as well. Now AI has helped us discover that whatever we were doing to solve for energy and power demands regarding the World Wide Web, the Internet of Things, or the cloud is not the same successful strategy that we're going to need for AI. And nobody knows what that strategy looks like yet. So we're in transition, right? We're in the middle of creating that strategy. And I don't know where we have to draw from, guys like you that are going to paint a big light for us on just how complicated and dangerous these migrations are going to be. But now we have to double tap out and zoom out a little bit more and be like, okay, so holistically, what are some of the industry indicative best practices that we all need to be adopting from resources and technology like software, it sounds like, that's meeting behind the meter. But what else do we need to be doing to get a little bit ahead of this to protect ourselves? Because the global economy is going to, the health of that economy will be predicated on our ability to create more compute capacity. And that falls back to a data center serving AI, cloud.
Big driver in the market right now.
I think that our industry is positioned to have a greater impact on humanity than since powered flight. It's already doing it. We're just not seeing it. It is the fifth utility. The first utility was plumbing, electricity, connectivity, gas, and now we all buy cloud as a utility. Every one of us pays $10 a month for some sort of cloud storage of some kind, but cloud is already a utility. So this is the fifth utility. You add all four together.
How many pictures you carry around on your phone?
I know. Well, I mean, it's not just that. It's how long you can access those. Have you ever tried to access a picture that you took at some race you did 7 years ago and it takes 45 seconds to pull that one up? Well, you can still get it, right? So the thing is we have these things coming along and we're not sounding the alarms. People are, I feel like the industry is in a stage right now where it's the pop fly is headed down to the outfield and most of the other operators or large enterprise hyperscale users are staring at it and waiting for someone else to call the ball. And if we don't start figuring this shit out a little bit more proactively, because there's always, it's a herd mentality. Every industry is. Right now you have this basin of water and no one can see the bottom and everyone's huddled around the sides of it and everyone's just waiting for the first one to dive in and make sure he doesn't break his neck, and then they're all going to jump in as soon as it happens. But that's the law of diffusion of innovation, right? So we have these 4 to 7 to 12% of the industry that gets the problem, but they're all waiting for someone else. We're waiting for an Elon Musk of our industry to step in and be like, this is what we're going to do. We're going to do this, and then we're going to do this, and then we're going to use solar in the long term or some shit. Because I believe that based on, what do I know? I'm just reading market reports from other nerds that are, but they went to MIT. They must be right. But I'm reading these reports and they're like, okay, we're going to use bridging solutions like renewables, natural gas until we get nuclear running. And at the end, we're going to have to figure out a way to not only harvest solar better, but store that energy better. And once we can do that, we have unlimited power source up in the sky.
I'm a big proponent of solar on the demand side long term.
Commercial or residential or all?
I mean, I think solar roofs are something that's going to happen.
Residential. I could see that. That's an application that applies to every home. Why wouldn't we do that?
Right. But if you look at how much of grid usage is residential, and if you knock a huge chunk of that down, and
then
those
it frees up capacity.
Right. So, the grid of 50 years from now is very different from the grid now.
The grid in 3 years from now should be bigger.
Well, and I think, to your analogy of everybody jumping in the pool, I think a lot of people have jumped in the pool, but no one's sure who's going to drown and who's going to keep swimming. And some of that goes back to the question you were asking, before on land selection is if you, I've seen so many projects where it's like, listen, you're shoving a square peg in a round hole here, and you can chip it down and you can beat it up and you can make it work. But
one time.
Right. Well, and then what does that look like down the road? And that's, and what kind of risks have you now taken yourself, assumed? What have you handcuffed yourself down to, where you go to renew that contract and they're going to tell you whatever they want because they know it's $15 million or $20 million for you to go do another solution. So they're going to, chew on that every time you go to a contract renewal. Like when we do deals in the wholesale market, if you're doing a 3, 4, 5 year deal with a supplier and a power in a wholesale market, and you don't have the option of buying from whoever else in the wholesale market, when you go buy blocks, you're totally beholden to them, and you're going to get smoked. And every supplier out there is going to put as much margin as they can on it. And if you don't have real time transparency into that market, you're screwed.
You're overpaying,
right? And so the same thing's happening on all of this infrastructure. And to your point, the oil and gas industry, if you look at the evolution of that. It used to take billions of dollars to go get a project going in Alaska or offshore or whatever. And then, the total evolution of that is guys used to plant a garden at a drilling rig, because it took 9 months to drill a well or whatever. Now some of these are 9 days.
Oh.
Right. And now you can, for $3 or $4 million, go out and drill a well and do it in a couple of weeks. So it's a totally different game, which is, led to that, hey, how much am I going to make? And when you see the decline production curve of some of these wells, you're getting, 60, 70% of what you're going to get in the first 18 months. And so, and there's a whole phase of just, oil companies drilling their brains out and not making money. And there was a big pullback in like 2015, 2016 timeframe. So there's been a whole bunch of evolution in that industry as well, where there's a lot of, financial rigor now around what those guys are doing and how far they're getting ahead of curves. And it's changed the way that industry is operated. And obviously that has a cascading down effect on the power and gas industry. One of the things we've seen in the gas markets is because of emissions controls and eliminating flaring, the oil and gas operators are paying to put gas in the pipe. Waha balance a month in August last year traded like a negative $1.50, right? And that's because operators were paying to put that gas in the pipeline, and you as a industrial were getting paid to burn it because that's the way the market functioned, because it's supply and demand. And so there's a whole bunch of massive shifts that are happening. And two, the thing that's really important is understanding what the energy landscape on a specific site or pipe or power line or market looks like right now is very different from how it's going to interact in 3 to 5 years when all of this stuff starts to come to fruition. I think one of the important things is if you look at this gold rush, it's not a year old, right? And it really got to a fever pitch 6 to 9 months ago. And so a lot of decisions that are being made now aren't going to actually reverberate through the markets for another
few years,
24 to 36 months at the minimum. And so understanding kind of how these things have transitioned and changed over the last 15 to 20 years, because like we talked about DCAC, there's a wholesale shift in the way power markets functioned when we moved from primarily coal to primarily gas as the marginal fuel. And that was a very violent time in power and gas markets, and when that transition was happening back in like 2010, 2012, right? So that same kind of shift is happening again. And so understanding how those things happened, understanding how all these things interact with each other is going to shed light on, obviously, if I could predict markets, like I'd be sitting on my island right now and just be a trader, and sleep at night and be a trader, which most of them don't get to do. So, but if you are cognizant and understand how what you're looking at from a land perspective and a gas and power infrastructure perspective looks now, and what is that likely going to look like in 3 to 5 years when a lot of this comes down the pipe and things significantly and materially shift. Those are the people that are going to swim, and the people that shoved a square peg in a round hole and made something work because this is where they wanted to be and really weren't looking at how this is going to evolve could find themselves in some really financially punitive situations. And if you look at when you build out the model on what on-site generation looks like, I mean, it's kind of like owning a boat. The infrastructure is the down payment. Is buying the boat is just the down payment on what a boat costs to own and operate, right? So it's no different. The O&M on this stuff is huge. And the O&M, if you want to build it like a data center operator needs to operate it, is bigger than huge. But understanding the dynamics of that and how that can be a grid asset and operate in markets and optimize can turn that cost, into a whole nother revenue stream that's helping the data center. And this is a big, we saw this shift in data centers going back to backup generation and DR, forever. N+1, the +1, I don't even want to use that one. I'm not bidding into demand response. I'm not going to do any kind of grid response. And some of them actually had in their SLAs that they couldn't. And then we watched that, but it was 10-year time frame that took to get that to really materially shift in the data center space where people were willing to actually interact with markets with backup generation. In a relatively short period of time, because that hasn't been that long that the data centers have gotten more comfortable with that, is now we have this material jump to now I'm going to build my own generation and just do it. And I don't give a flip about the market and the grid. I just need to get
my own power.
Right. And then there'll be the next iteration of interacting with the market, and then you have to do that responsibly. And then you have to think about how does that line up with all of this, overall national security.
Maybe those ones don't have to interact with the market. Maybe they don't give a shit. It's only for them.
Yes, but there's a certain scale of when you build really big power gen in island mode, it's a totally different animal.
Even if you're only serving yourself?
Yes.
How's that any different than me buying an engine for my house? So I have a backup generator to make sure my refrigerators don't go down in a power storm. They're not getting in the way of my business of doing that.
Right? But you're only powering your refrigerator. Think about this. Think about putting that backup generator in your house and then just running around your house and turning on the dryer and then turning on the oven and then turning off the dryer and then turning these lights off and turning this fan on.
Sure.
And you're doing all this crazy dynamic stuff, and that generator's sitting there the whole time trying to keep up.
Yeah.
Right?
Because that's steady state. Yep.
And then that's the challenge, right? Is it's again, and this is, I think, something that the data center industry just doesn't have their head around. And I don't know if utilities really—
I blame you for that.
Yeah, it's all your fault. It's totally different when you're dealing with a 2 megawatt data hall with a fast start generator and a UPS.
Yeah.
When you scale that to 2 gigs and you start moving around load.
It's a freight train hitting the grid.
It's the whole reason that the grid is so hard to manage, right? Is all these people are doing all these things at the same time. And at the end of the day, generators just react, right? They can't really preempt that unless they know what's happening. And this is why having that load and gen piece interacting and understanding what each other are doing is so critical, is because a generator can only ramp so fast. And there's some types of generators you can slam them if they're running, right? But then that requires you to just keep them running. And especially when you get to turbines, their efficiency plummets when you're only using them at 40, 50, 60% of load. And so there's a tremendous amount of dynamics here that are much harder to manage when you're disconnected from the grid. But the balance of that is I'm also not going to do anything detrimental to the grid, which I can also do if I'm not careful. And like we talked about, there's opportunity now for, software glitches, that's just we've all dealt with it, can now impact what's going on in the data center and impact that data center's UPS system or backup generators, or even cascade out into the grid. And so understanding all of those things and how that's going to interact, where does liability for that stand? I'm dealing with a customer right now that, we're having a lot of frustrations with the regional grid operator because of some significant voltage imbalances and line-to-line issues that they're having. And helping them hunt that down, and then helping them understand they've got to take action on this because this is affecting several hundred people's jobs. And so it's the grid is a social thing, right? We're all connected to it. It's, why we use AC instead of DC. And, that all of this interaction is about to completely radically change on like an order of magnitude level. And understanding the implications of that and doing this intelligently and not just as fast as we can is really critical.
Let me ask you another question because you're not answering the other ones. No, so I had a really good conversation with a colleague or an industry peer on the operator side. Mm-hmm. And I was asking what is the caution, right? We have all these land providers that are sitting on, they have access to capacity for natural gas as an example. They have land and they have access to natural gas. And I was asking some of these larger operators, what's stopping you from just going out there and building these monsters? And I think one of the first concerns was like, well, we're pretty far removed. If you got to the Permian Basin or you go to Orla or, any parts of West Texas, west of Abilene, basically. And they're like, look, you're pretty far removed from society. Like you have to worry about service teams getting there. You have to put a workforce there. What's it going to take to keep them there? Recruitment is a challenge right now, right? Retention is probably twice as much of the challenge, right? But they were talking about this. They're like, yeah, what happens if we as an operator go out there and we do go put together our own power plants and power stations to build these AI data centers? We are led to believe that these AI data centers, these large language model data centers, they're just chewing through data, and it takes 5 years before 5 years before they are worth of anything to where you can break off maybe a cluster and turn it into an inference data center for AI. And that's the inference data centers are where the money is going to be made, right? But these large language models, what happens if you build those things up and you get them big enough to where, cool, now they're, let's say by the end of 5 years from now, everything that's ever been created on Earth digitally, they've been able to consume in a large language model, and they've been able to exercise and understand that information. Well, the compute demand that they went through to index and categorize and aggregate all that data, there'll be a drop at the end of those 5 years, 7 years. So what do we do? Do we go buy a power plant knowing that in 5 to 7 years from now, those large language model learning data centers are no longer going to draw the same volume of power demand that it has because it's learned that information? So now we're just layering on top of it and the demand requirements can be less. Are we stranded in holding on to an asset that doesn't have enough demand for us anymore, so we have to go work and shake hands with the utility provider to figure out how to give it back to them? Will they lease it from us? Can they buy it from us so we can lease it back as a service? Yeah. So like, what do you see? And I'm not sure if you saw that too. I'm not sure if you heard those conversations, but that's not just been one person that's talked to me about those concerns, right? So there's a lot of things that are slowing down the adoption rate of things, but it's not demand. I mean, I feel like people right now are standing at the edge of the cliff and it's just a stack pile of people backing them up and getting everyone pushing a little bit more before everyone just kind of falls over the cliff. But right now people are waiting like, what happens if I build this? What if I build 400 megawatts of substation, whether it's 40, 10 40s or 4 100s, but I have my own infrastructure and I no longer need that for that client in 7 years from now. I'm going to be sitting on a shit ton of stranded capacity on a backplane that I can't get a return on because I don't have the demand myself for it. So it doesn't pencil.
I think, well, there's a couple of things to unpack there. So one is, there's an unlimited amount of demand in the next 5 years. But
unlimited for real.
The ability to build all that in the next 5 years is not there. And somebody was talking to me on a call the other day about, it's like 30 or 40 gigawatts of power is going to come online in Texas in like the next 3 years. It's like, dude, like, do you know what the procurement of that looks like? So part of that is this 5 year timeline. I think the other piece of that you alluded to earlier is when you start building in the middle of nowhere, it's a challenge to get to people to go there. I've heard and that some of the hyperscalers have actually had groups go out and find them land and power in remote areas and then been like, okay, hold on.
Yeah, they walked away.
I don't want to build all that out there. So, and
but
then
they're coming back. I mean, they're coming back. I mean, a lot of those groups are like, that's a last resort.
Right.
We want to know, that's the bench. Okay, so that's the bottom of the ceiling. If I had to really fall back, at least I got one of those aces in my let's go figure out if we can find something closer to an NFL city so I could fly people in and out.
Right.
And we're seeing that, but it's they're going to run out of capacity, or they're maybe not going to have access to the energy they need being that close to those NFL cities. They have no choice but to get out.
Totally. And the other thing, the oil field's dealt with forever, and we've had customers that have struggled with this. And, in the Permian Basin, have you ever seen what people make at McDonald's in the Permian Basin? Is, because you can make $100,000 a year if you can fog a mirror driving a truck.
Right.
Right. And so
hotels like $600 a night.
Right. So that's the other challenge, is when you're trying to get people to go live in West Texas or North Dakota, and some of these really tough areas that are, places that people don't normally want to go live. You got to pay a huge premium to make that happen. And so, I think a number of things are going to happen. One of the things is that doesn't have to be a strand asset long term if you understand how that market dynamic works and how you could move that, power and gas somewhere else. And make that asset work. And there's all sorts of different things in structuring gas pipes. We've done situations like where we had an industrial in Texas and our alternative delivery point was literally California. So there's a lot of ways to monetize things. And you're also seeing capacity getting bought up on pipes where it's gone. And that's another big shift, is where people are going in, and that's something new people don't understand, is if I want capacity in a gas pipe and I need it 2 years from now, I'm going to start paying for it now.
Oof.
And I'm going to pay $500,000 a month for the next 24 months so that when I connect to that pipe, I actually have that capacity there and I can flow it. And the other thing, though, is it's not truly an asset, because if you're buying capacity on a pipe that's not constrained, I can flow interruptible all day long on your firm capacity and not pay you. And so all of those dynamics are something that, they're learning right now as well.
I wonder if that is something that some of the private equity groups have already discovered or were able to project. And that's why they were taking a lot of these data center operators private, because the amount of pressure that goes onto a publicly traded company on a quarterly basis to guarantee these certain types of returns while they're investing into shit that they won't see a return from in 2 to 3 years from now.
And the CapEx is huge.
Yeah. I didn't realize that. I think that there's, what you just said actually is a big broad stroke that I've heard before, but I think it gets overlooked too often, where the big advantage that the groups have today is they play a much longer game. They're investing so much further down the line. Like I saw QTS invest, Stack, they were paying billions of dollars for infrastructure, supply chain positions in line, from everything from engines to, and I'm not talking about any one particular operator. I'm just saying, like, some of these groups are pretty sophisticated and they saw the writing on the wall and they were able to convince their investment committees to allow them to invest into if you're not buying engines right now for 2027, by the middle of 2025, you may not be able to get those engines in 2027 if you're not making those purchasing decisions in the next 120 to 180 days.
And that's one of the challenges too in that area is, and we're seeing this in breakers, we're seeing it in transformers, we're seeing it in engines, we're seeing it in turbines, is people are buying slots.
Yes.
As assets.
Yes. Not sure what they need yet. They're going to figure that out.
And the problem with that, though, is we also see a lot of stumbling, and that can be really expensive. I mean, we've seen a situation where we were looking at turbines that were 14 months out, and all of a sudden they called us 2 months later and saying, hey, these 2 slots, they stumbled. They can't.
You want them?
You want them.
I get phone calls all the time with people that are like, hey, and these are large companies. It could be anything from, hey, they got 100 PDUs they don't need anymore, to they got 24 to 32 engines they don't need anymore. Can you help us find a new home for them? So I'm seeing that stumbling take place in multiple levels right now.
Yeah. And it's only going to get bigger and worse because of the flow of capital right now that's just trying to get in and do something. I mean, literally anybody that's tangentially connected to real estate right now is trying to find data center land, and there's still a million people out there trying to do this. I'm going to go find power and I'm going to get into the game now and figure that out. And it's like, I mean, you can spend millions and millions of dollars and you're going to set half of it at least on fire. Yeah. And it's late to get into that game. And so, the real financial risk and the real challenge is executing. is it's not putting the plan together. And one of the things that we've seen in several deals that we've been digging into is, yes, you can execute on this plan. Literally, as someone who's been in this space and understands everything you're talking about doing, I'm struggling to think of one more layer of complexity that you could add to this. Like, yes, all of this can be done. Are you going to have all sorts of problems and challenges with just things freezing up, or that messing up, or this choking, or that breaking down because you have 15 things in a chain that should have 2, but that's what it took to make this site work? Yes. Can this work? Yes. Will you have 5 nines? No chance.
So again, we have to really not bifurcate this, but we have to break it into different compartments, right? You have the technology capabilities and limitations based on reality, human being capabilities, supply chain capabilities. Then you have the finance aspect of what we do. Everything that we do in this industry begins and ends with finance. If someone's not going to put money into this game just because they're good human beings, they're going to put money in this game if they could get a predictable return out of this game. So we have to figure out a way to make these things pencil out. So take the technology capabilities and limitations, which we have, we have so many big fat brains in this industry. It does not lack for genius.
Honest,
okay. You have the finance groups that are coming in, and they're just as sophisticated and armed to the teeth with regards to how they need to go make money. Services, components, whatever it is. Put those to the side and let's revisit national security one more time. Yeah. What we're unable to really account for is the unknowns. One of the things that we do know is that it is believed that before the end of 2020, we believe there are a lot of intelligence agencies that believe that these 1,000 people that trained, and if you haven't seen, have you ever seen Shane Gillis, stand-up comedian?
Actually, I think I have. Yeah.
Amazing. You got to watch his Netflix special. I think it's called Beautiful Dogs or something like that. I've got the chance to see him because I live in Austin. He's a resident at the Comedy Mothership. I've seen Rogan 50, 60 times there. And he has people like, you have tons of Netflix special people that are in Austin doing their shows at Rogan's Comedy Store all the time. Epic. I got to watch Shane do his. And if you've not seen that one, you got to watch it. But he does talk about the Al-Qaeda training videos that we used to watch. And remember 10, 15 years ago, it's like all these dudes with their monkey bars. Like, hey, not bad, right?
Yeah.
Not anymore. If you look at these videos of these people, they have their own versions of SEAL Team 6. They have guys that are dropping mags and reloading while running in the middle of fire, just like John Wick style. I mean, we are battling. Think about it. Over there, that is the only business, right? If you're a Islamic militant, your only job is to go figure out how to drive war, right? And kill the infidel. So we know that those thousands of people that went through the same basic training, that a certain percentage of them were trained on suicide bombing, and some of them were, based on bombs and IEDs. And we know that 1,000 of them are here. At least 1,000 of them are here. Those are the ones, not to mention the lone wolves and all those things. We could think about everything that we need to do from a technology capability limitation perspective. We could think about it and how it pencils out financially and makes everyone money economically. But we haven't accounted for the national security element, which is how we're going to have to rotate and pivot to the next time that someone does something equivalent to flying planes into buildings. And it could be attacking American symbols. It could be walking into grocery stores. There's a good chance it could be soft targets like the college universities, where they believe that one of the highest risks could be all these protests you see on these college campuses, this and that on Palestine as an example. And then all of a sudden you have one person click off a vest, and then when everyone rushes in, then they have the second person do it. And that's how they really,
was it Patriot Games?
Well, it's in every playbook.
Was the second bomb.
Yeah, it's in every playbook that these terrorists do right now. I mean, all of our soldiers, sailors, and airmen coming back from combat have seen these tactics, these strategies played out, but American people aren't seeing those things. We have to account for what's going to happen in national security and how we use advanced weapons, machinery, and technology capabilities that come from these data centers that must continue to evolve and grow, and how we have to continue to put capital into it, because we're competing against a free capital society or capital market, where a socialist economy is like, we don't give a shit if it makes money. We're dumping money into every one of these companies that could make us one step closer to having an advantage on power, specifically around nuclear. And then that's going to give us the ability to have a stronger muscle or machine to aggregate and compute data on these large language models, which will give us ultimately the advantage in AI, which if done, will be the ultimate machine, the ultimate weapon, right? So we're dealing with multiple different aspects of this industry. We can't talk about one and the other without talking about that national security and defense side too. And what we don't know is all you need is one more superstorm, like the one that happened in Texas a few years ago, Erie. But what happens if we have something that's just as catastrophic? Maybe it's not a national disaster. Maybe it's an intentional disaster. But either way, we have to prepare for how that would set us back in compute, right? And how that would have a negative impact on our ability to maintain our advantage, right? And really trying to solve for the unknowns, right? And I don't think that there's a lot of people doing that right now. I think people are trying to figure out how to make it work and how to make money making it work. But how to protect and defend it or use it to where we can use these. Can you imagine what our national defense would look like if we did not have the capability of technology that we have today? Having that wiped out because of our infrastructure of IT would be massively crippling. That's the ultimate Red Dawn. That's how bad things could happen to our nation, right? So I have to continue to unearth that. I'm going to be bringing on people that are going to be helping me on the national security and defense side. I got you helping me on energy. I'm going to bring on people that are going to unpackage the mystic elements of nuclear, because I think Oliver Stone did it better. Have you seen that movie, Nuclear Now? What do you think about that movie?
Listen, I've been a proponent of nuclear for a long time. I'm very curious to see, I think unpacking a couple of things you said there, right, is, if you look at what happened to the Russians, right, it was we just outspent them, and they don't have the capitalistic economy that we do to survive that, and that was what caused them to collapse. So, one, I think, having the system that we have is going to put us in a good position to win this race. Second off is building the infrastructure to be more robust than, what we saw in the Uri situation. And, there were regulatory changes made in the middle of that storm. It was kind of a mess. And so,
really?
Oh yeah. So building our infrastructure and the generation, because generation not being built for that was one of the big problems in Texas, is going to be a huge part of, doing that well. And winning this overall race. So that's going to be, a really important piece from a national security perspective of being able to build an infrastructure that, it's not like literally more than double, and do that in a way that has a lot of resiliency and redundancy built into it, and do it in a capitalistic way that, fiscally makes sense. And then there's, a whole lot of defensive things that you're going to have to do. To be able to, there's all sorts of stuff. And now, obviously, I'm not a government expert, but there's all sorts of things that they're doing to be able to protect against those kind of events. Unfortunately, when you have large groups of people, like, it's just really hard to manage a large group of people and understand who's there and what's going on.
Especially when you open your borders and let 18 million people come in.
That doesn't help.
It's really challenging.
Yeah. And so that's, these are all of these challenges working together is what's hard, but it's also what makes it exciting,
I think what makes it exciting is the labor aspect, because that's the human aspect. And that's where I focus all of my time and attention on, is trying to get the most output and productivity from a team. And I look at this and go, 1/2 of 1% of the U.S. population is in the uniform at any one time. And we need those people. But before the end of this year, there's two things that are going to be taking place. And this end of this year is like days away, right? So you have...
It's basically here.
Yeah. You'll have more baby boomers retire and more Gen Z in the workforce before the end of this year than ever before. And those are the digital pioneers that were born with social media in their hands. And they're the first ones. Like, I was talking to one of my sons the other day. He's a college kid. And he's like, if I could remove Instagram, Snapchat, he goes, I would do it in a heartbeat. Sadly, it's the only way to stay plugged into some of my friends. But if I could find a better way to tether to them without having to have those apps, I may be willing to adopt that, right? So, there was a time where cigarettes were really cool. No one likes cigarettes. There was a time where McDonald's was really cool. Now I think there's a generation that's emerging, Gen Z, that looks at their telephone or their mobile phone or their smartphone the same way that we look at cheeseburgers from McDonald's or cigarettes, and then that's not necessarily an unhealthy thing. Who knows what's going to happen? But I do know that 15 to 20% of the workforce now, before the end of this year, will be probably closer to 17% will be former military, will be veterans. And they've been in the mission critical environment since the day they took the oath.
That's great.
So I think that there will be a layer of a response team of people that have been trained and conditioned over the last 20 years with the war on terror to be able to have the emotional range to respond to the challenges that we face through technology, through the pressures that are put on us to deliver those technology stacks, to the finance arms that are looking to get a return on their investment as quick as they can, and whatever catastrophes that come, there will be a labor force that I'm a technology incubator for labor. That's it.
Yep.
There's 5 phases of a data center life cycle, and I'm here to support labor for each of those 5 phases in some capacity eventually. But a lot of those people will be veterans, and they're going to be able to respond to those things because, and I know right now, a lot of these data centers are already designed to where if you were to take out their substation, cool. They have belly tanks and engines that could run for 3 days to a week without even seeing the light bulbs flicker, and they have enough SLAs with fuel partners that they're going to have everything they need there. Like, trust me, they've designed those things. You're going to have a hard time setting back our infrastructure, but you can't hurt it. But we're designed already from a mission critical perspective to be able to withstand those types of setbacks. Again, we even took the layer away from the design of the MEP infrastructure and put it at the network topology and application level to where that's how I have retroactive replication. In case you take down a building, all that data falls into one of the other ones.
Yeah.
I didn't put all my eggs in that basket. I put 1/3 of them in that basket, just like I did that one and that one. I have fallbacks, right? So like we're going to get to the point where it's going to be harder for them to hurt us, but we're not there yet.
Well, and there's huge shifts happening, right? I think the irony of, going back to the kind of fast food and junk food is there's so many people that are getting back to what, people 70 years ago just did every day and thought was normal. I mean, I grew up in San Francisco on less than a quarter acre with 17 chickens, 3 rabbits, and a dog, and an entire organic garden we ate out of every summer. And like shaking the milk is what you did to make the cream mix back in because my mom just wouldn't buy homogenized milk.
Sure.
And so, you're seeing all of these people want to move back to, really healthy, old school lifestyle as if it's something new. It's not. It's the way everything was done before. And I think, too, the cool part about how that's going to dovetail into technology is, social media has had a massive impact on society. And I think there's, definitely some benefits in that and being able to, like your son, keep up with people that you could not have kept up with before because it just takes so much more time than being able to, basically monitor their life in a way you couldn't before. But it also has had some really catastrophic negative effects, especially on teenagers and, self-esteem and all this kind of stuff. And so there's a balance in everything. And I think the other part that's, if you look back on the internet and computers even, computers were going to eliminate paper. We use more than we did before because now you print it 5 times instead of typing it out once. So I think the same thing is going to happen here with all of this automation, right? There's a tremendous amount of dangerous, tiring, not fun jobs that people are doing right now that robots are going to completely take over, which is going to significantly increase the output and productivity of those facilities. But that's going to provide a whole nother layer of opportunity for people to go into fields that are much more, intellectually stimulating and interesting and on the cutting edge than they would have gone into otherwise. And you're seeing, to your point earlier, a huge resurgence in the trades.
Massive. That's the easiest way to become a millionaire in the next 5 years is to join the trades. Because the demand for those craftsmen and those tradesmen has never been higher.
No.
I think that you're going to see, there's another podcast I was listening to the other day where you'll see the obsolescence of college grow in time to where you'll have a lot of kids graduating from college with degrees that have already been made obsolete because of technology. So you'll see what they call the intelligent degrees become less high demand because AI is going to replace a lot of those skill sets and iterate faster, right? But all of technology, all of emerging technology is the Goldilocks model. It's always too hot, too cold before it's just right.
Yep.
We didn't understand what would happen when we put a Colt revolver in people's hand when we made the first 6-shooter, but it made it just as easy to kill 6 people as it did 1, or rob more banks because you have more shots. And
defend banks because you have more shots.
There you go, right? So it's and the same is going to be said with what we're doing now with technology, to where we gave technology to children, And we didn't realize the unintended consequences of that by the amount of people that'd be intimidated or bullied perhaps online, and how many people have harmed themselves or harmed others through those applications. But we also now are creating rules and other things around these things. I think at some point what we'll see is when we do become mainstream, and I think it's going to become mainstream because the demand of energy is going to force us
Data centers are already, I mean, they're in the spotlight right now.
They're in the spotlight, but it's not mainstream yet. It's not like you go to colleges and people are like getting degrees in this. They go to college and get degrees and things and all kinds of nature, but there is no career path for data center people yet. And that is once it is more mainstream, then we're going to start taking the homogenous constructs of education and applying them to how that impacts our industry. But we're not there yet, right? And we're getting there. I believe in 2025 will be the emergence year. I think before the summertime, everyone will have shifted their focus away from a bullshit election and Hunter Biden's laptop and who did what, and the people are going to be like, what is this AI shit all about? And what do you mean for power?
This year's been chaos, and it's going to kind of start to coalesce.
Everybody's focus will shift back to AI.
Yeah.
And when they start pulling at that AI thread, they're gonna be like, what is the risk to this? What is the greatest advantage? How do I make money off of it? And then you're going to see everyone racing to this industry. Everyone that's in this industry right now who has children is already having conversations at the dinner table saying like, listen, you don't need to go to college, because what you start learning your freshman year is already obsolete by the time you're a senior. So why don't you go get into the trades or get into something? I mean, I'm hiring from first responders, from the trades, or from the military. Either way, those three have an emotional range of seeing life and death.
Well, they've had to learn to operate in critical environments and think and respond, not react.
Yeah.
And that is absolutely, I mean, the speed at which all of this operates, whether it's gas markets, power markets, or data center infrastructure, all of this is happening. I mean, literally data center stuff's the speed of light.
It is.
Right. So, in intrasecond things disturb a power grid and can knock stuff offline. So, the ability to be able to respond and not react, and to really be able to start to forecast and understand how the dynamics of what are happening now are going to radically affect the dynamics of not just society and national security, but also energy markets and infrastructure 3 to 5 years from now. And what that's going to look like is really what's going to define who succeeds and who fails over the next 24 to 36 months.
I love it. Well, listen, we're going to try to bring this one home because I'm trying to keep these between 90 minutes and 2 hours. But this is a power one, and this one is a lot to unpackage, and it's so complicated. We're going to have to continue to iterate on these conversations. And I'm going to be bringing on a series of guests. Some of these podcasts are going to be focused on the human nature, like the human reset, like how do we get more output productivity from our teams? I feel that we're approaching an age in which, we are facing the silver tsunami. More than half of our industry has been in this industry for more than 20 years. Our economy is about ready to become a little bit more stable. We'll probably see some de-escalation and tension between us and some other countries, potentially a couple other wars going away. And when that happens, the economy gets stabilized and people's 401ks get a little bit stronger and more predictable, and they're more likely to retire. And a lot of those people have been in this industry. So we have half of our industry set to retire, and we have a massive demand, and people don't really understand how to even get into this industry. That's why it's super critical that we're talking about these things so we can recruit and draw talent into this industry, because I think Gen Z is going to be the answer for a lot of these problems. They're going to come in and they are so wicked smart. The abstract of how they view things is so much, the optics and how they view things through are massively different. They were born with this technology in their hands. So they're understanding how to value it and appreciate it and leverage it in ways that we weren't, because you were still shaking your cream milk. Whatever, I don't understand what compound you were growing up on or what cult that was, but I'm joking, obviously. But do you understand things are just different?
Dude,
we weren't
absolutely.
born with that stuff. And I welcome those people, right? This podcast is actually targeting them, 18 to 24-year-olds that could come in and make a difference in the space. But I do think that there's some pretty radical shifts that are getting ready to take place. I think guys like us are going to have to continue to try to unpackage these things. The last thing I'd ask for you as we're bringing this thing home is, we talked about a lot of shit that could go bad, a lot of things that are really challenging, a lot of constraints to this industry, a lot of challenges in this industry.
Yep.
I don't want people listening to only think like, holy shit, I want them to be hopeful and optimistic and see that this is where they could come to grow their careers. There's companies in this industry that you could come to lead and be led at, and successfully and significantly make an impact to this industry. And I tell people the reason why you want to come park your talent, your passion here is because this industry in the next 3 years will have a greater impact on humanity than any other industry on earth.
Yep, I agree.
So based on what we're doing, we're transforming the way we roll out the technology, the way the technology transforms humanity, but the way that we're really shifting from an economy of energy from fossil fuel, natural gas, to eventually we're going to get to more of a renewable balance and eventually to nuclear. I just don't think nuclear is the last step. I think that there's going to be some way for us to get more out of the sun.
Well, fusion's also starting to make progress.
It's going to take time for that to be popular again.
Right. Well, it's
fission is still having a hard time.
Right. And I don't think nuclear is here tomorrow.
Yeah.
I don't think
it could be. It's a 76-year-old nuclear navy.
Well, agreed. That technology is here.
Yeah, SMRs.
Far more.
We got 34 different types of nuclear reactor propulsion plants.
Yeah, and listen, energy density is all that matters. And so the density of data centers is just skyrocketing, and the density of gen has to skyrocket. And part of the problem is some of the technology we're working on right now on the nuclear side isn't that dense, which doesn't really help. So you've got to get density at scale, which, is a whole another thing to unpack. But I think earlier to your point, the future is bright.
It is.
There's so much opportunity. And listen, anywhere that there is tremendous opportunity, there's always tremendous risk.
Yes.
Right? If there isn't tremendous risk, there isn't tremendous opportunity. That's just true all across life, period.
Life is about the risk.
Right. Totally. And so, you even think about the experience you'll gain from the military, right? It's taking huge risks that most of us, people like myself, have a ton of respect for what you've done, and so many other people that have been in the service have done, is taken huge risks that we never have. And so I think that is the exciting part about this too, is this is going to transform everything.
Yes.
Probably even an order of magnitude larger than the internet did. And so being a part of that, I think, is super exciting for people coming out of college, and people that have been using technology literally their whole lives are going to have an advantage. And so, that's the exciting part of the journey next. And I agree with you. I think, 2024 has been chaotic. A lot of people are just coming up to speed. A lot of people are just trying to figure things out, and things are going to shift, I think, materially in 2025 to really start to coalesce this. And so it is super exciting. And it's a fun industry to be a part of.
If someone is sitting in one of these data center operators or these large enterprise end users, G1K, doesn't matter how big they are, how do they reach you? Because people they don't know what they don't know, but they're getting into an area in which they feel a lot less comfortable. I feel pretty comfortable building data centers all day. There's so many tier levels. There's only so many different mechanical permutations. There's only certain ways that we could deliver electrons. The energy side seems to really be evolving in a way in which we're trying to, energy density is evolving. My thing is how would these operators or these enterprise groups that are listening, and they're like, look, you're right. Yeah, we know that there's a challenge. Who do we trust? Where do we go to get the information we need to in this day and age? Because it is dynamic. It's not static. The way that we build data centers today is different than what we were doing 3 months ago, let alone what we're going to be doing 3 months from now, meaning the way that we deliver power to those things are going to be different too. So what is your advice to people that are listening? How do they engage with you first? Make sure they know and understand how to contact you. But what would they reach out to you for? Where would their journey begin? Start with, I need to get to this. I have to build these things. The first conversation I have is this. Everything in the middle, that's a journey, right? So how do people engage with you, and how do they start those journeys?
We're engaged with people on a whole bunch of levels. So some of it is in existing data centers that they're managing currently that they don't realize they could be managing a lot better, and related mainly to power, because most of them aren't messing with gas yet. We are working with a lot of people on sites and where to be, and how is this site going to be really difficult? Is
greenfield?
Correct. Okay. And even brownfield stuff. We have some big brownfield stuff that we're working on right now, and some of that brownfield stuff's really, really challenging, and some of it makes it a whole lot easier. And so understanding the infrastructure, getting power infrastructure there, getting gas infrastructure there, understanding how all that's going to work. And then we have
people just calling you and saying, what is my capability or limitation to power or gas on this site?
Oh, yeah.
That's it.
It's
that simple.
5 of those calls a week.
Okay. So people can reach out to you if those are the challenges they're facing today.
Mm-hmm. And then walking through the whole, we have some that we're engaging where they've already gotten halfway down the road and then realize, okay, wait a minute, I'm neck deep and I don't know what's going on here. And so we've jumped in and helped with pipeline interconnections and demystifying or stopping them from getting ripped off. We saved somebody double-digit millions a couple weeks ago by just helping them understand they need to negotiate something they didn't know they could negotiate.
Yeah.
And so that's the challenge, right? With anything new, you don't know what you don't know until someone helps you understand what you don't know. And that's, it's a lot of fun. Like that's the exciting part of what we do.
How do people reach you? Legend Energy Advisor or
legendea.com. They can reach me on LinkedIn or Crosby at Legend.
You still have your OnlyFans page going, or is it just limited now?
I'm kind of limiting the number of followers.
It's IT,
yeah,
limited. It's for power consumption. You bring it down.
A lot of passwords.
This is what I would say. If you're listening and you, first of all, if you're listening, please like and subscribe the podcast and help grow the base to where we could help grow the message and we could help grow the industry. Like we're all in this together. This is the People's Podcast, People's Conference. I have a real day job. I'm trying to solve labor problems. That's my primary purpose as a business. The podcast is so that I can reach the soldiers, sailors, and airmen at all the bases, and that we could expand into other verticals, which is what we're doing with you and me, right? Like I didn't want to play in your world, and who knows how much you wanted to play in this one. It's a complicated side alone.
Yeah.
Data centers are massively sophisticated and heavily dense on MEP, right? But there are people that are going to be listening that have solutions that we haven't even talked about. They can hear the problems that we're talking about. Like, did you know that we could do this? It could be a piece of hardware, a piece of software. It could be a service that they offer that could help move the needle for the industry, not just for their business, but they can introduce solutions. So my request to anybody listening is follow the podcast, like and subscribe or share the podcast. And if you're someone that thinks that you have a solution, a service, an answer for some of these challenges, reach out to us, reach out to Dan, reach out to me, and let's find a way to get this platform underneath you so that you could use your voice and share these solutions. Because I didn't create DCAC because I felt the industry needed another conference. There's 1,000 of them.
Right.
And
there's one every week if you want to go.
100%. And I've been to most of them. I have the liver to prove it, right? So I felt like the industry needed a better one with a greater purpose and a greater focus on advancing this industry. The only way to do that is have a greater exchange of ideas like this. We have to have platforms that allow us to, like I'm going to be bringing on people that are provocative and disruptive and they're going to be challenging. I'm going to argue with them. And it's awesome because we need to have those conversations too, right? I blame those stupid ass baby boomers for raising us kids to not talk about politics and religion and sex because that's the only things that people fight about now. But today, those aren't the things that we need to be arguing about. We need to be figuring out what we're going to do to get our kids healthy careers in emerging industries that they can help impact a lot of souls by what they're going to be doing. I'm trying to offer people the understanding to find a career in something that's significant to humanity, right?
And that's huge.
I think that is what this industry offers. I mean, I have 3 kids. Next year I'll have 2 in the SEC and 1 at the Citadel. And all of them, I tell them, it's just a waste of time. It's just for them to go party and watch football and have fraternities and grow networks. But
unless you study engineering.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, look, there are certain things that still matter. But a lot of things that we do in this industry are OJT. It's you only learn the space through immersion. You didn't learn the shit that you know in a classroom.
Look at how many people actually, I mean, unless you were, trying to be a doctor or a lawyer, like how many people completely did something different than what they majored in college.
We just don't need it. Colleges are for profit, so they made the world and society believe like you can't get a good job unless you go to college. And the reality is most of the people that are contributing in the greatest ways in this college have never stepped foot on a college campus. The people that are having the greatest impact in this industry, they whatever college they went to is just so they could root for someone on Saturday, and that's where their parents went, and that's who makes them proud. But it's not like you're going to go to college and learn how to have a massive advantage here unless you're in engineering. Yeah, I would say the same would have been for finance, but a lot of AI is going to blow them people out of the water too.
Yeah, I mean, I think if I look back on, so I started college pre-med history because I wanted to do reconstructive pediatric facial surgery, and then realized I hated school.
Yeah.
So organic chemistry all of a sudden became elective and switched to chemical. Hated that. Switched to mechanical, so my brain works that way. But I think if I look back on college, like engineering school just taught you a totally different way to view the world and just think and solve problems. And I think that was the greatest benefit of it. It was, I mean, they were tests that were 4 questions long, and the teacher literally, I'll never forget, I think it was thermodynamics 2, said this test will take you 4 hours to complete. You have 2.5 hours, begin. And it was just
4 questions, multiple choice?
4, yeah, right. We had nothing multiple choice.
That sucks.
But it was all about following your thought process and how are you breaking a problem down.
But that is all it's about, is the thought process, the breakdown, the creativity that you get.
Well, and understanding how things work, like materials and
complicated
physics.
things.
Yeah. Like that.
I think that's what you're learning in engineering, is how to exercise your brain for abstract, complicated, challenging things that you have to work through. I think that that's no different than the military. I think going to the military for 4 years is the same. You're being trained from an emotional range and how to deal with mortality and how to deal with the responsibility of managing others' mortality.
And complex problems in really tough scenarios.
Some of these schools that they send us to are pretty advanced, right? So like we're learning, like I've never looked at grades. Like my kids come home with their grades and I'm like, good for you, right? I've never rewarded them for that shit or punished them for those things, because it was only simply their grades were only a reflection of their interest in a topic. If I put them in something that they're interested in, it doesn't matter how complicated it is, they're going to exercise their brain. They don't only not need my motivation to do that, they wouldn't let me stop them from doing that. And I think college, especially the complicated things, are really designed more for that creative thought skill, the creative learning, the ability to work through challenges without raising your hand and ask for help.
And that's the caveat in college, right? Are you there to have fun? Are you there to challenge yourself? And it's going to be fun.
Yeah.
It should be. But that's the difference.
I think the only thing I'm seeing right now is I have a son who's wrapping up or getting ready to be on the back half of his junior year. And I think that he's like done with college. He's partied enough. You know, he's been in a fraternity.
Everybody gets their junior year.
He's like, listen, I just want to graduate, get a job, make some money. I'm done working at this bar. I'm about, you know, so
yeah,
it's a good time to be in this game. Those Gen Zers, we're talking to you. We want you to come into this game and bring everything that you've learned about technology and whatever you've learned in or out of college, in or out of the military, in or out of the trades, whatever it is that you've done. If you've worked through complicated challenges and you're capable of reinventing yourself, we'll help you do that through immersion. We'll just put you on a job site.
It's the best way to learn
the language. Yeah. So, well, Dan, we're going to continue to have to do this throughout 2025. Sure. And I want you to bring your shit together next time. I mean, can you please?
I'll do better.
What we have to do is we'll unpackage these things. Look for the trends that you see when people are coming at you for the next, quarter, whatever it is. And let's unpackage some of those, because whatever one person has a question for, I could be in a room and one person will ask the question. I realized that everyone there had the same question, but only one of them had the courage to raise their hand. So we are solving problems here with these podcasts. So please keep it going, because I know that you're going to have a lot of engagement as a follow-up of this one. Okay.
Sure. Enjoyed it, man.
Thanks for being here, brother.